Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.
Welcome again to another episode of ARC Advisory's Smart City podcast. Today, I'm excited to have as our guest Glenn Cook of EV Transports. Glenn's been very active in the electric vehicle world, not only in Florida, but around the country and internationally. And I welcome him here today. Welcome, Glenn. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you very much, Jim. Good to see you again.
Hey, great to see you. And thank you for your robust participation at our ARC forum in Orlando a few weeks ago.
Man, I would say it was great to be up there on that panel with everybody. I learned a little bit too.
Yeah, it was robust, and I would actually point to all of our listeners. That video is out there, and you could watch that at your leisure. But Glenn, let's jump right in, and can you share with us a brief overview of your perspective of the electric vehicle landscape? Basically, the general background, what do you see? Because you've been in it for quite a while now. I know you've had lots of electric vehicles in your life. Perhaps you want to touch on vehicle types and impacts, and maybe even legislation that may or may not be needed in the past and future.
Sure. Actually, a little bit of background. I formerly was the vice president of business development out at the Villages many moons ago. And during that time span, I was on the advisory board for the National Limousine Association, as well as the Motor Coach Association. So I spent my time dealing with fossil fuel vehicles, of course, diesel, regular gas-powered vehicles. And that's what prompted me to get into the electric vehicle spaces when I was lobbying in D.C. for a diesel fuel surcharge tax. And I kind of looked at one of our representatives, Daniel Webster, and I said, man, I just can't do this anymore. And so I started researching electric vehicles, and I got into Tesla, actually, at the time. And this was before, of course, Tesla became Tesla they are today. And I reached out to a gentleman here at the University of Central Florida by the name of Dr. David Metcalf. And he had started a program called Friends of Tesla. And I told him, I said, what would be great is if we could actually transition our commercial fleets in the National Limousine Association away from the Escalades, the town cars, fossil fuel burning vehicles into electric fleet vehicles, and maybe even, gain a little knowledge on the autonomy front with level 2 autonomy that Tesla had come out with their autopilot. And so that's how I actually started my journey, was with Tesla and the National Limousine Association back in 2018.
Wow. Now, I know I've seen some images from your past where you've had a roster of electric vehicles with you. Can you touch on a little bit of your history there?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we started off working with Tesla, and one of the things that we decided to do is we worked through all the iterations, starting back with the 2015 Tesla Model S, had hardware 1.0, was working with Mobileye at the time on the autopilot, being able to basically, lane keep distances and maintain speeds, also utilizing their supercharging network to be able to recharge the vehicles strategically. Then at that time, we also started working with the Model X Tesla that had just come out. And this was all during the time period where Tesla was going through what they would call production hell in the Model 3. So we had 3 different models of electric vehicles being able to utilize the L3, DC3 charging network from Tesla right here in Orlando, Florida. And they were strategically placed, up and down around the theme park areas, midtown area, downtown, so that, if we needed to, we could actually recharge the vehicles and, of course, charge the vehicles at our homes and be able to do rideshare with the vehicles, be able to generate income with these vehicles, and to show and approve a use case that you didn't have to have a gasoline burning engine to be able to generate revenue, in the vehicle for hire space. And we proved it over and over again with the S's, X's, and Model 3s.
Wow, that's fascinating. So as you alluded to a variety of vehicle types, so actually transitioning away from the big black car and the Escalades and those kinds of things. So what is the current situation today regarding, not only the development of electric vehicles themselves, but the larger ecosystem of electric vehicles in Florida and in North America?
Well, as of right now, of course, everybody recognizes the fact that we just come out of the COVID era. And with that, we had a lot of shutdowns. And I was not exempt from that either, because we had a fleet of electric vehicles, Teslas, and these things were not very cheap vehicles. And we still had, vehicle payments, and we had insurance to pay. And during that time period, we were doing research with the University of Central Florida, like I said, with electric, partially autonomous vehicles. And so when we shut down here in the United States, we could no longer transport passengers for vehicle for hire and revenue. So we actually had to look at our data, and Dr. David Metcalf suggested, pick out your two key metrics. What do you see in your data from utilizing your electric vehicles? And it turned out that it was 1 and 2 passengers, and a 15-mile radius between pickup and drop-off points was actually about 85% of all the transfers that we did. And I looked at that and I said, man, we literally weren't generating any revenue. So what could I do during this research time to be able to pick out these key metrics and to provide a service that we can start generating revenue again? And we called it the eternal pivot. So I had just happened to notice on a YouTube video by Galileo Russell on Hyperchange that they were talking about this company. It was called Arcimoto, and it was a 3-wheeled electric vehicle, had a range of about 102 miles, and it was designed for last mile mobility. So I researched them, bought a couple shares just so it would be right into my stock feed. And I started researching them over and over and over again. I started following them. So then I got onto their website, and at the very bottom, it said investor relations and fleet management. So I called up the fleet management number, and lo and behold, this gentleman by the name of Sam Fittipaldi picked up the phone. So I started a conversation and a dialogue with Sam, and I said, you know what, Sam, my data says that your 3-wheel electric vehicle is going to be the next big thing, just by data alone. That we can be able to service 85% of the population with your mobility product. And if we can get people transportation at a low cost, equitable manner, then why wouldn't we do it? 0 emissions, 2/3 less the cost of a normal vehicle, much less an electric vehicle, where you didn't have to pay for fuel, oil changes, excessive amounts of maintenance. And I said, why not? Let's give it a shot. So he said, you know what, Glenn, I want to give this a shot, because one of the things that we found is one of the key markets for us is the Florida market. And on top of that, we're having a problem with legislation down in Florida. I said, well, Sam, funny you say that. I know some legislators.
Yeah, so Glenn, let me just restate this for our audience. So the situation you found, and frankly, it probably you were enlightened because of COVID and the revenue hiccup you had there, was that the vehicular and personal transportation market is not only high-end Escalades, it could be something else.
Yes, sir.
So in your mind, the current situation includes this frankly unserved market of 1 or 2 people, short distances. So
yes, sir. That was 85% of our data.
So I mean, I see a gap. I know that I'm here in South Florida, and there's an awful lot of electric bicycles, but that's at the other end of the continuum, and that there's clearly, what you're stating is that there's a gap between the electric bicycle and the Tesla or the electric F-150 or Escalade or something like that.
Yes, sir. And that's what we found too, is that strategically, especially when you're dealing with the DOT or the DMV, they have classifications for vehicles and you have to register your vehicle. Well, there was a huge gap between the motorcycle and the car. So that's what we focused on when it came for Arcimoto. And there wasn't language yet for a three-wheel electric vehicle in our state, nor for a lot of states for that matter. There was only 3 states in the union that we found that had the language for what's called the autocycle, which essentially is a three-wheel electric vehicle.
Let me interrupt you for a second. So, I mean, you're actually guessing my next question is, what are the complications, the obstacles, the impediments of moving electric vehicles forward? And while electric vehicles can compete head to head very nicely against existing vehicles, here is a brand new market. In fact,
yes, sir.
So let's focus on that brand new market. What are the obstacles? And before you get started, I know that here in Florida, I do see three-wheel vehicles that are internal combustion engine vehicles.
Yes, sir.
To me, they look like a three-wheel motorcycle, perhaps. And I'm not talking about I'm not talking about a converted Harley, but 2 wheels in the front, 1 wheel in the back, and I believe they're licensed as motorcycles.
Yes, they are. For insurance purposes.
How does that differ from? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I know you've had some legislative successes. Talk about those vehicles, then legislation, and then perhaps markets that could be served.
Yeah, well, you alluded to the fact of a three-wheel vehicle in the market that has a combustible engine. Well, that in itself lies the problem for electric vehicles, because essentially there's not charging stations kind of like on every corner like you would have for fossil fuel vehicles, like you have for gas stations. So infrastructure is probably the number one thing that holds back the electric vehicle market right now, and which also just happens to be one of the main legislative barriers that we have found as well. So that's why currently the legislation has come out with the new infrastructure bill. And a lot of that is geared towards the appropriations for the infrastructure for recharging electric vehicles. And so that's probably the biggest barrier of entry right now, is people feeling like, hey, I can refuel this thing, or I can get enough electrodes in this thing to make me go from point A to point B. So how do I strategically do that? And that's with new infrastructure.
So how does so you're obviously working with three-wheel vehicles with a company by the name of Arcimoto from the Pacific Northwest. Why was legislation required when we see three-wheel motorcycle type vehicles here on the roads in Florida?
Well, specifically, it hadn't been done before. It's kind of like a paradigm shift. If it's never been done before, then most people don't think, well, then it doesn't exist. So we have to educate people to say, hey, this is the art of the possible. If you can actually look at something and solve a problem, fill a pain point, so to speak, and to give people new options, we want to be able to do that and to create a better user experience and to be able to give a better quality of life to people. And that's what our research was built around. So when we found Arcimoto, I said, look, guys, let's give this a shot. The worst thing that we do is we try and fail. So then when I started introducing this stuff to the university and to the state people and the cities and the municipalities, number one, they wanted to know what it was, how you would register. And then another thing they wanted to know is how you tax it. Well, there wasn't a checkbox at the DMV for an autocycle. So we actually had to create that language for the electric vehicle autocycle that had 3 wheels and 2 electric motors. So it took us literally a year and a half to do that alone.
So this autocycle definition, I'm guessing the attractiveness is that you do not need a motorcycle license to drive it. Is that, or motorcycle insurance for that matter?
Well, there again, that was one of the key things, because I have a couple of friends that were state representatives, and I reached out to them. I said, look, this is what we need to get accomplished. How do we get autocycle built into the DMV, the DOT, so that people, when they register these pieces of equipment in the state, that they get an actual registration, their little sticker, a license plate, and, buy insurance for it. Well, come to find out, the legislators looked at it and went, you know what? We're a tourism state. That would be wonderful if we passed this legislation and you didn't have to have a motorcycle endorsement. The vehicle is safer. It's got a roll cage. It's got dual seat belts on it. It's ultra safe, ultra efficient, 0 emissions. We get all these pluses, and we can get tax tourism dollar in when people come here rent the vehicle. They don't have to take a motorcycle endorsement class, which is 2 or 3 days, which would prohibit most people from engaging with the rental because they don't want to waste 2 of their days on their vacation here in Florida going through a motorcycle endorsement course. They want to be able to jump in it and operate it. So the goal was to create the legislation that allowed our tourism or our people that came in from other states, which is here in Orlando is huge. That's 60 million people a year. So that come through our airport to be able to rent a vehicle, fully sustainable, electric, zero emissions, not have to have a motorcycle endorsement, operate it as a rental or subscription, as it may be, and be able to enjoy themselves and have fun and experience, the outdoors and be in the environment and, also have safety and roll cage around them and seat belts and to get the user experience. It's about the experience.
So Glenn, I believe the legislation passed recently,
Yes, sir.
signed by the governor.
Yes, sir.
And it was not only an motorcycle, 3-wheel, non-motorcycle endorsement bill, but I believe, did it not include some autonomous vehicle language? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we were pretty strategic about it. Matter of fact, we're the only state in the union that did tie in the autocycle language to an autonomy bill. And we did that strategically because our governor, Governor DeSantis, is very forward thinking. And we were very lucky to have Senator Brandis on our side. He championed the bill to begin with. And strategically, we placed it inside the language of an autonomy bill for delivery services. And then once Representative McFarland, who is right down south of Senator Brandis, tied it into her House bill, it passed the House and the Senate unanimously. So we have the electric autocycle language inside an autonomous vehicle bill, which the governor signed into law immediately on July 1st, 2021.
Yeah, I think he did it at SunTrax, didn't he?
Yes, sir. And we're having an opportunity now and of course, Arcimoto wants to remain agnostic as far as a platform is concerned. So we're working with multiple robotics companies for this autonomous feature.
Okay, so you came into this market and discovered an undiscovered, an unsupported market in terms of a lighter vehicle with 1 or 2 passengers between that motorcycle or electric bike and the larger electrified traditional vehicle. And you came to it with the passenger for hire perspective initially, but what other markets have you looked at? Have you done much research in that area?
Well, yeah, we have. Matter of fact, I've done a lot of research over the course of the last 3 years since COVID began, or 2.5 years as it may be. One of the things that we're finding is that people like to operate their own vehicles. They don't necessarily want to give over all of their, everything about the motor vehicle. They don't want to have somebody drive them. So what we found is people like to have subscriptions, do rentals. And by coming to Florida, they get to experience the auto cycle through a rental process. It started off actually down in Key West. We've opened up more of the rental sites with Arcimoto. And what happens is people are allowed to rent them, take them back, and then through our CRM system and our intake, Arcimoto sends them out an option to be able to purchase now. So it's basically a conversion. You experience the vehicle through a rental. They send you the questionnaire. If you really like it and you want to buy it, then you can buy it online, just like a Tesla. Another thing that we found is for manufacturing purposes, let's just say that somebody's going to go out and buy a Model Y Tesla. Well, a Model Y Tesla weighs 4,000 pounds, has numerous batteries in it. The weight of the vehicle, sheer amount of materials that go into the labor and the manufacturing is literally 3 times that of a Arcimoto. So if you can reverse engineer that and think, hey, we can utilize an Arcimoto for 85% of all mobility needs at 2/3 less the cost and 2/3 less the manufacturing with materials. Why wouldn't you do it? So then we started saying to ourselves, well, let's give that a shot. We'll pilot it in the city of Orlando, and we'll pilot it with the fleets, and we'll pilot it at Lake Nona and different areas, and we'll try it out and see what happens. Well, we're finding more and more that people just enjoy it. We piloted it at the Orlando Auto Show. We had a line so long that we should have had more vehicles there to give people the experience. But I know our bandwidth was limited as far as personnel. So we're finding that we have more interest than we have capacity to actually build these things now. So now we've had to slow our roll, so to speak, a little bit and create this mass manufacturing scale facility out in Eugene, Oregon, which happens to be Representative DeFazio, who's in charge of the Committee for Transportation and Infrastructure. He's the representative for Oregon, so he wants it in his home state first. But believe me, Glenn Cook's lobbying for the state of Florida to get the next micro manufacturing facility. That's for sure.
So, Glenn, before we get into particular, markets for an auto cycle, given the Florida legislation, one of the, of course, big themes that in the last 5 years, 10 years, increasingly is, sustainability, ESG reporting, all of that, having a broader stakeholder community. Transportation does take up an awful lot of resources.
Yep.
CO2, greenhouse gas emissions, road wear, all of that. How does an auto cycle, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but can you perhaps outline that, what are the lessening impacts by having a vehicle that is lighter and more fuel efficient? What's the weight of a typical auto cycle versus a typical vehicle on the road, and what are those related impacts?
Yeah, essentially, you're looking at like a 4,000-pound electric vehicle as compared to a 1,300-pound Arcimoto. So 1,300 pounds as opposed to 4,000, 2/3 less weight, and that reduces your footprint too on the road. So if you're thinking about how wide the lanes are, we have accommodated full-size vehicles now since basically the end of the World War II era, and our roadways are designed around that. But if you actually change form factors of vehicles to serve 85% of the population, you could shrink down our roadways also at the same time to about half the size, thus giving back, more areas for trees and grass and, things that don't produce what I would call, the cement jungle out there.
Right. Less maintaining of asphalt and all
less materials in general,
less roads to light, all those kinds of things.
Yes, sir.
You gave us a number of 4,000 pounds for a typical vehicle. Can you draw a contrast to the contrast of electric vehicle weights? Because I know that
essentially, if you look at a Model Y, which is a smaller form factor electric vehicle, and you can go all the way up to like 6,200 pounds on a Tesla Model X. And a lot of that is just the sheer chassis size, amount of batteries you put in it. And then also the amount of labor that goes into manufacturing these things. When you reduce the size of a vehicle, you also reduce the impact as far as decarbonization is concerned with the amount of electricity you use to manufacture inside a manufacturing facility. So everything across the board gets reduced with the size of your vehicle, less materials even when you look at a smaller form factor vehicle. The same amount of materials that go into producing one Model Y, you can literally make 2 Arcimotos or 3 Arcimotos.
Right. Well, there's no argument that EVs are less impactful to the environment. There still is a premium of a 50% weight gain from the equivalent vehicle once I go from an ICE to an EV today, and that's plus the torque. The different torque curves means you're eating up your tires because you get the little lead foot and you want to burn rubber and all of that. So even as the world electrifies, there will be even a larger impact when I contrast that 6,000 pound vehicle versus something that's maybe a third.
2/3 less
of that.
Really?
Yeah. So, while you entered this as a vehicle for hire business, transporting persons, what other markets does this address? Are there? I mean, and I don't want to think just the common ones. Like I look at the vehicle and I think of the parking meter attendant or things like that. But are there other applications that have gotten traction in this auto cycle world?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, we're already testing that here, and there's certain things that I have under NDA that I can't talk about, but I can specifically talk about certain areas like public works, a flatbed that we designed after the pilot with the city of Orlando. They're utilizing that specifically with Berman Corporation here in Lake Nona. Security, delivery, all of those types of form factor vehicles that are being utilized on a daily basis now for us to test and say, hey, look, not only can we do the things that are needed to be done around the community, but we can do it with a zero emission vehicle that has 2/3 less the foot imprint as a normal vehicle inside the community. Example, we reached out to the fire department and said, what was the art of the possible here? If you could pick a vehicle and we could tool it up and have the lights and the sirens and everything, what could you do with a vehicle of this size? He said, funny you should say that is because we have a real problem when we do events, example, a soccer stadium, Electric Daisy concert. We can't get our Freightliner trucks down a sidewalk, but you can with an Arcimoto. It's only 64 inches wide. You can get an Arcimoto on a bike lane, taking it off. Actually, if you had to put it on autonomous vehicle mode, you can move it over to a bike lane and get it all the way down and not even obstruct traffic if you had to go 25, 30 miles an hour. So less impact also, with the human factor, I guess you would say, road rage, that type of stuff. Oh, I got to go as fast as I want to go because I'm a human driver. Well, we have to deal with restrictions when we deal with autonomy. We actually obey the laws. We go, if it's 25 miles an hour, the vehicle is programmed to go 25 miles an hour. It doesn't do 45 and a 25 because it has a human driver in it. It follows the laws.
Glenn, this question might be too granular, but let's take a stab at it anyway. I know that there, in the last couple of months, there has been a police department, I believe in the upper Midwest, that converted their police cars all to Tesla Model S's. Mm-hmm. Because they simply looked at the dollars per mile cost of police vehicles. And it came out to be, a no-brainer decision.
Right.
It was a dramatic cost decrease. Have you looked at the, cost per mile of an auto cycle, given its, smaller battery, smaller cost, smaller impact? And I mean, I'm not asking for particular numbers, but
I'm going to give them to you.
Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I give you very specific. The auto cycle is ultra efficient, basically. And if you look at a Tesla, even, and this is something that's very efficient compared to a normal squad car. A normal squad car, they might get let's say 1 mile to 20 per gallon, give or take. A Tesla will get right around 105 miles per gallon equivalency. An auto cycle, 173 miles per gallon equivalency. So just extrapolate that all the way down to miles per gallon. And that's just what you're burning in fuel alone. And that's not the oil changes. That's not an extra tire. That's not the cost of the fuel, the emissions, the cost of medical care because somebody that's asthmatic has to go to the hospital because they're breathing in toxic fumes. I mean, all of these costs of society have to be extrapolated into that ROI.
Oh no, that was my supposition, and I could imagine it won't be long before we start seeing Instacart deliveries by similar auto cycles.
That's part of the secret that I can't tell you about.
Hey, well, this has been fascinating so far. As people evaluate their transportation options, whether you be a city fleet operator or an operator of a small plumbing company that might need vehicles, what recommendations do you have generally on electrifying your individual vehicle or your fleet, as well as your choice of whether you have 4 wheels, 3 wheels, or perhaps even 2 wheels?
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, the auto cycle is not going to be everything to everybody. And I'm upfront with people. If you're trying to go to Miami from Orlando, get in a regular car. But if you're trying to stay in your community and you're going to go shopping and you're going to do basic maintenance, or you're going to go get a cup of coffee or go to the bank or anything like that, absolutely, the auto cycle is a better solution because just the sheer cost of operation is substantially less. The impact on the roads is substantially less. When you get done, majority of places now at least have a level 2 charger. So I always call it ABC, always be charging. So when you get to your location, just plug it in. You can download a free app. It's called PlugShare. It'll tell you where every charging station is around any given area, especially any urban area. And it just makes it more efficient. And when you're done at night, you go home, you can even plug it in right to a 110 outlet. You wake up in the morning, you got a full battery charge. Simple. Most people sleep, 8 hours. And that's all it takes to charge on a regular 110. Ultra efficient.
That's great. I mean, from my perspective, I look at things from a systems engineering perspective, and I think there's certainly an attractiveness here for an autocycle 3-wheel device vehicle. And it really ultimately depends on your stakeholders and what exactly are their needs. And as long as you focus on their needs, well, you might, the autocycle may fit and it may not, but certainly it's been an underserved area.
Yeah, well, honestly, that's what we're dealing with right now with the customer discovery that we're dealing with right now in the underserved equity areas is how do you get people into the workforce? How do you educate people on maintenance in these things? How do you educate people that are just might be coming out of the penitentiary that might have a felony to be able to get a high paying job after they get out, or somebody that might be going out of high school into community college? Are you going to train them in being a diesel tech? No, you're going to start to train them into high voltage, dealing with areas like the electrification and wiring systems and going to kilowatt batteries as opposed to replacing a fuel tank. It's basic things like that we want to train up people so they have higher paying dollar jobs in our higher education systems. And even going, let's say, from the Boys and Girls Club of America, junior high level, all the way through secondary level education, higher education, engineers, all the way up to doctoral candidates. So you have a whole workforce and educational pattern that we're creating. And we're doing that now with some of the grants that we're trying to fulfill here in the Central Florida area.
Hey, that's great. Well, hey, Glenn, this has been a very great overview about some fascinating developments in the world of electrification and transportation and legislation. We do have a number of guests that are listening in, so and the list isn't huge. So I'm going to unmute all of everyone, and if there are any questions from the audience, just I think everyone should be unmuted, or you can unmute yourselves. You're allowed to talk now. Feel free just to say who you are and ask us a question.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, Todd.
How you doing? So I'm wondering, obviously, I'm looking at your list. You've only got a number of states where you're starting to see this kind of take hold. When do you expect to see more buy-in across the country?
Well, one of the things about our DOT, and it goes state by state. So what we are asking right now is for different states to start looking at the language for autocycle and reach out to your representatives, reach out to your senators, and take the business model of Florida or Oregon or California or Washington State, Hawaii. There's 7 states now in the union that have adapted the autocycle language. So take a look at it. And I've seen people tie it into, like the state of Florida, we tied it into an autonomy bill. In other states like Virginia and Maryland, Alabama, they've started tying it into tax credits for EVs. So it gives people an incentive, so if you can tie it into an incentive of a tax credit, well, let's do that. Why not?
Why is it not as simple as being equivalent to like the Can-Am product? I mean, obviously Can-Am is gas powered versus electric. What is the difference that's holding people up on that?
Right now, it's a paradigm shift. People are just not used to utilizing electric equipment. And I would say probably the biggest holdback is infrastructure. People want to know and have range anxiety about where they're going to charge. So I'd say that's probably the biggest obstacle is infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from our guests, our listeners today? All right, then. Well, Glenn, thanks for joining us today. Do you have any?
Thank you, Jim.
Hey, you're very welcome. Hey, do you have any other final words for us today?
Yeah, I tell you what, one of the things that I was pretty excited about was the fact that we did pass EV credits in the last Senate vote just recently. However, there was not language at the federal level for auto cycles. So we're going to be revisiting that in our state and just trying to educate people. It takes a little while sometimes for government to react. But I will say that once we start creating these things more on the West Coast and we start shipping them all over the world and scaling this product globally, creating more infrastructure, it is going to be the next big thing. Auto cycles are more efficient. They serve more of a population. They're more equitable. And I look forward to more people giving them a shot. If one comes to your town, I would encourage everybody to give it a shot. Get in there, whip it around for a little while. They're fun. They're really fun.
Glenn, I probably should have asked this earlier, but with the recent bill that passed the House and Congress and the President, he may have signed the inflation bill, the EV tax credit is re-enabled. And it will be delivered to you when you buy the vehicle rather than when you file your taxes. Have you looked at whether an auto cycle qualifies for that credit?
It is not as of this time. The way the language is set is for four-wheel vehicles. However, I do have a lobbyist up there that I'm currently working with. It might take another session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. We don't know. But we are working on that. And I'm specifically working with the agency called ZETA, which is the Zero Emissions Transportation Association. Mr. Joe Brighton is the executive director of that. And the person that's in charge of his policy and procedure is Leilani Gonzalez. So we are specifically working with that agency as a lobbyist to work that language in the next time it comes through, man. And maybe even to the House, things can be adjusted and they can be amended. So we're working hard at that.
Certainly. Well, hey, Glenn, this truly has been fascinating again. If any of our listeners on the podcast would like to contact you, can you give us your contact information?
Yeah, you certainly can. It's Glenn, Glenn, at EV Transports, EVTRANSPORTS.com.
All right. Well, hey, again, Glenn Cook, thank you very much for being a guest on this edition of ARC Advisory Smart City Podcast. We thank all you listeners for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you all on a future edition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities Podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.